Good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Kwan, and today I'm going to talk about the project that I did with the City of Port Moody around food security. So in the presentation, I'll cover a little bit of background, some of the work I've done, and an overview of the findings and recommendations. Food security is a pretty complex topic. Working with the City of Port Moody and talking to different stakeholders, I found that people were using the same words, but it seemed like they had different meanings behind them. So I did a little bit of work in the project to talk about food system, food security, and how the pillars of the food security fit into the food system itself. And more importantly, help them understand that food security has two important dimensions. One being community food security, which looks at food security, which looks at the community as a whole and relies on the local food system to address food security. And the other dimension being the household individual food insecurity, where of course that looks at individual households and individuals. And the focus of the report I did for Port Moody looks at household and individual food insecurity. And the other important thing to highlight is that household and individual food insecurity is rooted in poverty. And in terms of food security being a complex topic, again, it's important to understand how everything fits together and where everything belongs. So I talked about the food security continuum. Stage one interventions look at addressing immediate food need, and stage two is really building the community's capacity around food literacy. And stage three looks at interventions that help redesign the system to address root causes of food insecurity. So for the context of the report, Metro Vancouver came out with the Regional Food System Action Plan in 2016, and that was the impetus for the City of Port Moody to become really interested in this topic. They passed a motion to start a food security task force, and the purpose of this task force is to look at this document from Metro Vancouver and provide council with recommendations on what the city should do to address food security and larger food system issues. The report itself is two-part, has a scoping report and a set of recommendations, and the intent of my work is to really help inform this task force to help them fulfill their commitment to council. Looking at the data from Stats Canada, speaking to local stakeholders around food security and certain content experts, and also looking at the city's policies, existing policies, I came up with some pressing issues, one around the vulnerable groups, likely to be Aboriginals, visible minorities, seniors, lone parent families, in particular female lone parent families, and low-income households. And then surrounding these vulnerable groups are factors that I felt were influencing food security, things like income security, housing affordability, accessibility to food, and social cohesion. And to highlight the housing affordability issue, as we all know in BC, expensive housing is growing astronomically. And it's no different in Port Moody, housing being one of the highest expenditures for most households. And the higher those costs, the greater sacrifices are made in regards to purchasing and accessing food. After looking at the data and all the information, I came up with 5 recommendations. The first was for the city to consider basically continuing to implement their existing policies and programs. They have a lot of policies like their official community plan, their parks and recreation master plan, and even their transportation plan that addresses or helps to address food security. Things like promoting community gardens, providing support for community programming such as cooking classes. And also, the transportation plan improves access throughout the community so that people can access different amenities and food sources, not just by car, but by walking, cycling, and whatnot. The Other important thing regarding their existing policies is to monitor and evaluate these policies and programs and to ensure that outcomes are met and to address the unintended outcomes. The second recommendation was to consider actions in the Regional Food System Action Plan. The action plan actually names Port Moody in 8 of its actions. I found an additional 40 that the city could consider, and most of these actually align with their existing policies and programs. Third recommendation is to consider facilitating the creation of a food policy council. Food security is not an issue that can be addressed by any one sector, and I feel the city should consider working with their stakeholders through such a council to address it. The fourth recommendation is to consider facilitating a community food security assessment. The work that I've done in the report provides a good starting point, but is not a full food security assessment. The main component that's missing is to engage with the community and in particular vulnerable people in the community that are facing food security or have faced food security. And last recommendation is to support the development of a food asset map for Port Moody. The data for such a map is largely available, and really it requires the city and stakeholders to come together and piece it together. Significance of the findings, basically it provides the city with more information on food security. I trained in the planning department and they have 5 people and they do not have a social planner. So the people in that department who are working on this, literally it's on the side of their desk. So my involvement was to really help pull all that work together and provide them with some information. It raises awareness of pressing issues in Port Moody. Port Moody is one of the more affluent communities in the Metro Vancouver area. But despite that, it's important for them to know that there are low-income people and families. There are people facing food insecurity. Another significance is to help the city understand that they have a role in improving food security. Again, that goes back to their understanding of food security, food systems, and whatnot, and to understand that they have a lot of policies and programs in place that is already doing that work, and they should continue to do that and expand on that. And another significance is to build upon the city's existing community partnerships. A lot of the stakeholders I spoke to are very excited to work on this with the city, and I think the city should take up on that opportunity. And finally, as a conclusion, again, as I mentioned, a lot of informative information for the city. The recommendations I've put forth are very achievable next steps, and as I said before, there's a lot of stakeholder interest. For myself, it provides me with a better understanding of local government policy and decision-making, as well as challenges in food security for the local context, things like funding, political priorities, and whatnot. And that concludes my presentation. I'd like to thank my supervisor at the City of Port Moody, Mary DePauli, and Nigel for guiding me and providing support through the practicum, Nigel and Charlotte for reviewing my paper, and of course the stakeholders and content experts that provided their wisdom and insight for my report. Thank you very much.
Excellent, thank you. That's great. Oh, questions. Start here.
Hi, Alex. Thanks. That was great. I'm interested in the food asset map recommendation and how you came to that recommendation, and just tell us a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. I came across that initially by reviewing policies and programs of stakeholders. Fraser Health, the local health authority, has a low-cost free food directory. There's a homelessness task force in the area that has their own directory as well. There's a lot of overlapping information, but doesn't comprehensively cover all of the services in the community. In addition, the same year that the city approved the formation of a food security task force, they also approved staff to create a food security website on their webpage to list certain resources. And I looked at the draft, and again, it had a lot of overlapping information, but was not very comprehensive. So that's why I say all of the information is there. It's easily available. In addition, working with Fraser Health, they can perhaps coordinate with the health inspection program because they would have a listing of all the food places that they inspect.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. That was a great presentation. I just had a question, more of a thought perhaps, that you might like to reflect on, was of the 5 recommendations you made, given you sort of talk about lack of resources and people are sort of extended, where would you start on your list of 5 recommendations? Which one do you think they should tackle first?
I would start, I would really urge them to start focusing on starting a food policy committee. I think that is a good starting point because, again, there's a lot of stakeholders who are just ready to go. They want to work on this with the city. Because of city's other priorities, they haven't been able to really put a lot of focus on this. I think that's the first step. The very close second step is the food asset map. That's going to be a very quick win for this group and for the city.
Great. And there was another question down. Oh, there we go.
You get lots of questions. Great job synthesizing all that evidence into really clear recommendations. I was really actually interested near the beginning of your presentation, you had the continuum for food security. I've never seen something like that before. Was that your own design, or was that something that you found in the literature or from other professionals?
Definitely something I found in the literature, not of my own making. I have to say, when I started looking into food security, it kind of boggled my mind because there's all these different things that are happening in terms of interventions. And when I came across this continuum, it seemed to all make sense. And it really helps, as I said, the stakeholders understand it too. Some of them I speak to, like the folks who run the food banks, obviously they understand this very well. But speaking to other groups who, perhaps run the farmers markets and run Meals on Wheels programs, they didn't really have a very clear understanding of where they fit and the purpose of these stages as well.
It's very interesting. I really like the continuum as well. I think picking up on something we've already talked about this morning during Dr. Henry's presentation, she had her slide up around the different causes of the epidemic, and Trevor made a note that there was often not as much focus on the upstream factors. So even if we look at stage 3 with food system redesign, you can think of anything that could be added to that list that would be about these upstream factors that if we had interventions that made a dent in them would potentially have effects on food security down the road, even if they weren't necessarily involved in food system redesign.
I think a big one, which is on there already, is some sort of economic development strategy, because income being the root factor in food security. The City of Port Moody does not currently have an economic strategy, but they're wanting to do one. And that's something that is part of that recommendation to continue doing what they want to do and to expand on it.
Great, thank you. Thank you.